So the way I'm going to prove that this symbolically, or the Pistis Sophia symbolically represents a people, is by going to a book called The Hebrew Goddess. And this is just dealing with the background of the Hebrew goddesses and just the understanding when we talk about these symbols and how they can represent whole groups of people, and why the goddess, in particular the Pistis Sophia, would represent a group of people, especially when the understanding in the book of the Pistis Sophia, Jesus uses the understanding of David, who also represents a group of people. And so when we use this in comparison, these stories are layered with symbols, and they're giving us the different symbols that they are layered with, showing us that not only does this deal with the spirit, the Pistis Sophia, which represents the pretty much the divine energy, like the feminine energy in the Coptic version of or the esoteric version of Christianity, that spirit that pervades all of consciousness, Jenny from the Good Place, so to speak. It is the Holy Spirit, if you can imagine it as so, that which connects all of us. And the way you can understand it, and I'm reading from the book called Hebrew Goddess by Robert Pattai. At least as old as the Near East, nude statues are myths in which goddesses play a larger, more universal role. The earliest answers to the question of whence all reiterate in various forms the same idea. It was out of the body of the Primordial Goddess that the world egg emerged, or that earth was born, or alternatively, it was the goddess body itself that provided the material from which the earth was made. So thus, when we take the Pistis Sophia, and you deal with her being trapped by Sabaoth, and her being used by the demons, and her power being taken to create these worlds and these things, this hologram, this is what this is coming from. This is coming from the light, the mind of this planet. We represent that in flesh. This light had been subdued by another force, and thus it was being used, it was being sucked up, it was being destroyed, controlled. And like I said, this is something that we get on so many various levels, because it's not just symbols and something that they were just writing. This deals with high-level science. So, thus the oldest cosmologies, like the oldest worship of concretely represented deities, typically start with the Primordial Goddess. So, Freudian, or the Freudian position on the goddess, is that she represents the stage in the early development of the human individual in which the mother appears to the child as the all-powerful source of both gratification and deprivation. The goddess is a mother figure whose qualities are universal because they stem from an unconscious fantasy common to all people from time immemorial, which have their primary source in the infantile mind. The child, in his jealousy of the father, repudiates his role in procreation, wishes to deny the mother its sexual being, preferring to think of her as a pure and virginal, hence the virginity of the goddess image. The father repudiates his role in procreation, wishes to deny the mother is a sexual being, preferring to think of her as a pure and virginal, hence the virginity of the goddess image. When the child learns the truth, its wish that the mother should be a virgin is frustrated, and it then unconsciously regards her as a harlot. Hence, the goddess is not only a virgin but a harlot. Moreover, in a very early fantasy life, the frustrated nursling wants to devour the mother's breasts, imagines that he actually is destroying the mother and projecting his own hostility upon her, fears that she will devour him. Hence the bloodthirsty character shared by the ancient Near Eastern virginal and wanton love goddess. Now, Jungian analytical psychology considers the great goddess as a primordial image or archetype in the sense of an inward image at the work in the human psyche and symbolically expressed in her figures as represented in the myths and artistic creations of mankind. The workings of the goddess archetype can be traced in rites, myths, and symbols throughout history, as well as in dreams, fantasies, and creative works of both sound and the sick of our own day. The archetypal feminine, designated only relatively late in history of mankind as the Great Mother, was worshipped and portrayed thousands of years before the appearance of the term. A wealth of symbolic images surrounded her, and she herself appeared in numerous manifestations as goddesses and fairies, she-demons, and nymphs, sometimes friendly, sometimes hostile. An essential feature of the primordial goddess archetype is that it combines positive and negative attributes. And this union of opposites in the primordial archetypes, its ambivalence, its characteristics of the original situation of the unconscious, which consciousness is not yet dissected into its antithesis. Early man experienced this paradoxical simultaneity of good and evil, friendly and terrible, in the Godhead as a unity. While as consciousness developed, the good goddess and the bad goddess, for example, usually came to be worshipped as different beings. So, just telling how in the mind this is expressed psychologically, which creates pathologies, which in turn is seen or can be peered into by looking at the mythology, is what they are describing, is what they can see in the psyches of these people, and what the processes that they see that goes into the thinking of the creation of these mythologies on a logical, from a logical viewpoint. But when you deal with, Jungian, that's definitely deep, and it points a lot back to what I was saying as far as this being a story about something very ancient that is in DNA and is been told over and over and over and over again to get us back to that point of understanding of how to be at a higher state of mind and how to go beyond this third dimensional reality. And to show you that these are just stories that are passed down, I'm going to read a little bit further. Now, where Asherah, Astarte, and the other goddesses served by the biblical Hebrews, Hebrew goddesses were merely foreign abominations as labeled by the prophets. Gods are rarely invented or discovered, rather they are taken over by one group from another. Even Yahweh had pre-Hebrew antecedents, and so had the deity called El and identified by the Hebrews with Yahweh. The Roman Jupiter goes back to the Greek Zeus Pater, who in turn is derived from the Sanskrit Dies Pater. As long as a god is alive, he can easily cross international frontiers and establish himself in a new country and superficially change, but basically the identical image and function is the same. This is what probably happened to Asherah, Astarte, and Anath. They arrived at different times, no doubt, among the Hebrews, and although foreign in origin, they soon adopted the Hebrews as their children and allotted them all the benefits a man finds in the worship of a goddess. There could be no doubt that the goddess to whom the Hebrews clung with such tenacity, down to the days of Josiah, and to whom they returned with such remorse following the destruction of the Jerusalem temple, was whatever the prophets had to say about her, no foreign seductress, but a Hebrew goddess, the best divine mother the people had at that time. Following the death of the spirit of idolatry in the days of Nehemiah, the Hebrew goddess succeeded in surviving. She underwent, to be sure, an astounding metamorphosis, but then that too is the mark of a living deity. In one of her manifestations, she penetrated in what period we can only conjecture the rebuilt sanctuary as a female cherub, poised in material embrace with her male partner in the dark cell of the Holy of Holies. In another, she became the manifestation of God's presence, the Shekinah, a feminine name just as God is masculine. the loving, rejoicing, mothering, suffering, mourning, and general emotionally charged aspect of deity. Her role thereafter was minor and restricted, difficult to trace for several centuries. One can, however, surmise that she must have gained strength in the course of that time and gradually asserted her independence, because during the 13th century, and this is very important, because she was raised up or sent to the 13th Aeon. The Pistis Sophia was sent in the 13th Aeon and was raised up from the 13th Aeon. And in the 13th century, when in Kabbalicism invested in Judaism with a new vitality, she emerged as a distinct female deity, possessing a will and a desire of her own, acting independently of the traditional but somewhat shrunken masculine god, often confronting and occasionally opposing him, and playing a greater role than he in the affairs of her children. Now, understand this. Often confronting and occasionally opposing the male god, which would be Yahweh, and playing a greater role than he in the affairs of her children. This is just, not just words. The people of Israel. Okay? So, once again, we have to go back to Kirmea Awa's work. He deals a lot with Israel. He deals a lot with David. And the Shekinah represents the mother of Israel. They all represent her body. We all have a piece of her light. We represent the mind of this planet in flesh. And the Shekinah is the spirit that connects all of us, that is within every single one of us. And so when you deal with this story of the Pistis Sophia or the Shekinah, you're dealing with the story of us, the story of this planet, as told in symbol and mythology. And that's what we're coming to, and that's what I wanted the understanding to come from. Because these aren't just words. There's a lot of research that's put behind this. It's not just in me assuming or, me just trying to connect some conspiracy. No, we have come to a pinnacle now where we can be directly connected to spirit. We can be in the fifth dimension and go beyond this third dimensional experience. The whole purpose of life is to transcend it